Good afternoon. So Ian and I are doing a double act today. I'll start with the presentation that's on the right-hand side there, and then Ian will follow up with some points, and then we're happy to answer whatever questions you've got at the end. Okay, so without any further ado, thanks for having us, and there's my title. So I'm going to be talking on desktop inspections. So if we go to the next slide, this is the layout for my presentation. We'll cover how it started, what we decided to do, what went well, what we learned, and what now and where next. So let's go with how it started, and we'll move on to the next slide, please. So here it says OBI process, which was office-based inspection, but for that you can read into remote inspection, whatever terminology you're comfortable with. Unlike Rachel's description of what the FDA do, ours is actually an inspection. And I'll explain the process as we go. But essentially, I was asked to volunteer to come up with the process for remote inspections, and that was partly because of work that I'd done previously. We have this big symposium in the MHRA annually where we have run for a couple of days, and we present to industry, and there's normally about 350 people on each day where we repeat each presentation, and I've presented a few times there. And on two occasions I've presented videos, and actually more than that, but on two occasions that are salient to this, I've presented videos, one in 2016 and one in 2019. The 2016 one related to how to review Excel spreadsheet data and just what to look for so that you could understand trends. And as an inspector, that's what we do during inspections. We look at trends on deviations, change controls, etc. So I did the presentation on that, and then in 2019 I did the presentation on maybe in a bit more depth how to use pivot charts to then get a bit more knowledge out of the information that you've got. And those two QR codes will take you to the videos on YouTube. So if, or if you can't get them that way, just look me up on YouTube and you'll get to those videos along with a couple of others that may be useful. But because I had looked at this information and presented on it, it was considered that might actually be a good starting point for how we approach remote inspections or office-based inspections. And so it was because of that that I was asked if I would do that. So if we go to the next slide, the background really is timings are going to come up in a second, and all these timings are for 2020. So on the 16th of March, I was asked if I could come up with the process that we would use for remote inspections. And so I've done a few remote inspections. I also had done those presentations, which made it salient for me to be asked to do this. I'd had some bad experiences, I guess, with remote inspections, so I wanted to get the best out of it that I could. So I was asked on the 16th of March. Things were moving quite quickly because of COVID, and on the 20th of March, the MHRA put out a notice that said we are no longer doing any on-site inspections. So in that background from the 16th to the 26th, I came up with a process that would work, that could be implemented quickly, that was used as much information as we could from the existing processes, but tried to learn from some of the potential pitfalls. So I trained the other inspectors virtually, remotely, on the 26th of March. Then I answered some questions, tweaked the process a little bit further, and then on the 1st of April, sorry, we did our first remote inspection. So that was less than 2 weeks after the lockdown came about because of COVID. Next slide. So there are some challenges or potential challenges associated with desktop inspections, and it's actually really hard to build up a relationship with people when you're discussing things remotely. You can also get your visual cues. So when you're speaking to someone, you can see not just their voice, you can see in their face when they're confident about what they're talking about. You can see when they are nervous. You can see when they are overthinking things, and maybe the information that you're telling you isn't the full truth. You miss out on the social cues of people that are off to the side of you. And essentially, we get a lot on an inspection that you cannot quantify just by looking at a document or and you can't replicate by being in front of a camera. So that was identified as a risk. There's also a potential risk of inspections lasting much longer than you would expect or anticipate for various reasons. I certainly done a couple where I believe it was probably at least 3 times as long as it should have been inspections. And what can happen is if you are not quick in doing the inspections and focused on what you're doing, you can then spend far too long, and then what happens is you end up running into your next inspection. You can also be distracted by emails coming in. You can be distracted by phone calls, and if you're not very careful, you can get yourself into a situation where you lose track of which inspection you're doing. Then it's easy to really communicate in a way that you think is clear with someone, whether that be via email or quick phone calls or being online with them. But more often than not, the message doesn't go through clearly, and you end up creating some confusion on the site. The site then answers to a question that they perceive you've asked and you haven't. That then confuses you, and before you know it, you're in a situation where you're spending far longer trying to resolve incidences of miscommunication. And it's quite easy when you're on site, but it's a lot harder if you're doing it via mail or even via calls. And then what can happen as well is you're stuck in front of a desk and you just end up reading everything. When you've got an inspection, if you get given a deviation SOP, a change control SOP, etc., you read it fairly quickly because you know you have to keep moving. You have to be on to the next topic. You have to be out on the inspection of the site. You know that you have a defined amount of time, so you read it and search for the points that you're interested in. But when you are on a desktop inspection, if you're not careful, you end up reading the whole document. It takes quite a long time. You don't necessarily understand everything. You then ask questions and then things come back, and you take hours rather than 20 minutes, 30 minutes to go through procedures. And that's before you even get to the particular examples. So there are some risks that are inherent there. If we go to the next slide. So what we decided to do. Yep, next slide, thanks. So we've got a good inspection process that's been running for years now, long before I joined. And what I want to do is take as much of that as possible and cut and paste it and just enter a new process and change as little as possible. So if you click next, every inspection starts with a pre-inspection letter. And so we send that, and in it, we've added in some pre-inspection requests. Over the last few years, we have included a number of pre-inspection requests anyway that we look at before we come, but we've now expanded those out. And those pre-inspection requests are specific to the type of activity that a site does. So this example is for an importation company in the UK, but it could be for an API manufacturer, a drug product manufacturer, a sterols manufacturer, a blood establishment. We have probably getting on for 20 different types of inspection that we do. And so we set out a list I used the experts in each of the areas to bring out a list so that we were consistent in the information that we asked a site to provide before the inspection. We also laid out the way that we wanted that to be presented, what information we wanted in certain columns, and the format that we wanted it, whether it be Excel or Word. If you click again, this is the example for importers, and it's probably one of the shorter ones because there's no manufacturing going on, and there's over 40 different requests. And next, thanks. So there's no way that works on email. We've done inspections before remotely where information comes in and out, and sometimes the file size doesn't make it, and it's hard to follow and track through emails. So we decided that we needed a file transfer system. So we're happy to use the site's file transfer system. So if you've got one, that's grand. We're happy to use it, or we've got one as well. Then we would just need to know which one of your people we're going to be uploading. So that allows all the information to be sent on in advance. Then what we ask the inspector to do is to look at it and read it and try and do as much as possible before the inspection starts. What we typically do for an inspection, obviously, is we travel to an inspection, which is normally a day. If it's overseas, it can be 2 days. And we also travel back. So there's 2 days that is just purely traveling that could be taken up by doing some preparation. And so if the inspector then has done their reading, they know what they're going to look at. So then we go into the opening meeting, and in the opening meeting, we would do that completely as normal. Obviously, we're not there physically. We are on camera, but we would go through exactly the same steps, and we would speak to people and introduce ourselves, do everything there. And okay, just throwing me there with the things that are coming up on screen, but never mind. The opening meeting, which would go as normal, half an hour, something like that. And then the inspector would be able to, because they've done all this prep work, immediately after the opening meeting, ask the site, right, these are the deviations that I want to see. I have some questions on your change control system. And the back room and everyone in the room would then be able to progress immediately, and everyone would have a job to do, and there would be no downtime. Because otherwise, if you have the opening meeting and then you call off, the inspector then just starts reading, you've got everyone at site not knowing what's going on. Obviously, it's a bit tense for them. They'll be sitting there waiting for information, not knowing what the inspector's looking at sometimes, and it can be quite difficult. But if we've provided that information, we can just go straight into the inspection, start asking questions. The backroom can be looking for the deviations, change controls, complaints, etc., whatever we've asked for. And then we touch base at various points through the day. And what we do now on remote inspections that we wouldn't normally do, unlike the FDA, is we wouldn't do daily roundups. But during these remote inspections, there's still potential for confusion, and it can be sometimes difficult for the site to understand exactly what the inspector is doing. So we now run a short daily roundup, not to cover all the deficiencies again and discuss them, because we're perfectly clear as we go through the process. We will make it absolutely clear to all members of the staff that we're communicating with whether there's a deficiency or not. So the daily roundup is a useful thing, and then it also helps us to work out what we're going to do the next day, or if there's any delay to the next part of the inspection. Once the inspection is completed, and this is purely a remote inspection at this point, we do the closeout meeting just completely as standard. The closeout, again, we're online, but we would go through exactly the same process, speaking to people, and then provide a post-inspection letter immediately afterwards. And then once the site has provided their responses and everything is okay, they get a GMP certificate. If you could click twice, that would be handy. Thank you. And that GMP certificate will say on it that the inspection was carried out based on a remote inspection, and that will be on the back page. And that back page isn't classed as a restriction, it's a comment, so that anyone who's looking at it knows the scope of the inspection. So whenever you're looking at a GMP certificate, you should always look at the back page as well to see what restrictions or comments are in there. So that covers the the off-site part of the inspection, the remote part. And then what we decided to do was we would carry out an inspection of the areas that we didn't see, the manufacturing areas, the labs, and then also, depending on the time difference, we might also have a look at some of the, again, we would give our deficiencies in a post-inspection letter. We would get any responses, and we would then close out the inspection. And this time we would give a GMP certificate with no comments on the back. Next page. So what went well? Next page. Yeah, perfect. So the main thing for us, I guess, is that we maintained regulatory oversight. So we were able to carry out inspections, demonstrate that we were doing our job as a regulator and maintaining patient safety. We believe that the sites appreciated being inspected, and they certainly were happy to receive GMP certificates. The process worked because we identified deficiencies and we tracked and trended those, and yeah, they weren't too dissimilar to what we would find on site. And obviously the scope wasn't the same because we weren't looking at manufacturing in the same way and we weren't looking in the QC labs in the same way, but we did find deficiencies, so it worked well. The file transfer system, I don't think anyone had any problems with that. Everything worked smoothly, and we were always able to find the documents that we were looking for. And the daily touch base at the end of the day made a big difference, and people were able to make sure that they understood exactly what was required, who needed to be there for the next day, and if there was any causes for concern. And from our perspective, it facilitated the supply of critical medicines as well, and some medicines, critical medicines, to support the COVID pandemic. Okay, next page. So, what did we learn? Next slide. We worked closely with some of the other authorities and learned from them, and also fed back our own understandings and what information was useful and what pitfalls we'd find. So that was good. That's us working internationally, and we'll continue to do that. We learned that they do take longer, these remote inspections, even if you're quite smart in the way that you do it and you prepare in advance. But the prep work does make a difference. It can be useful to have a call with the site beforehand to make sure that all the technological issues are sorted out and they understand the process that we're going to go through. And we do just accept that you gain some time back by not traveling, and that is time that is useful for you. So we do try to stick to timelines as much as possible, and given the right circumstances, we can actually do it in not significantly longer than the time that would actually be on site in a normal inspection, particularly if you make frequent contact with the site. And making frequent contact with the site also leads to everyone being calm, because you know what's being discussed, you know what the person's doing, the inspector's doing, and the site are able to put their resources into the right place and not just have people hanging around, not sure what's going on and sitting in the back room doing nothing. We weren't sure if this would happen though or not, but we did actually find some critical deficiencies. And from a remote inspection, obviously that validates that this is discriminative and giving us the information that we needed. And again, we can argue that that definitely, if it was a critical, that meant that either the system was not in control at all, or ultimately that there was patient safety issues. So by raising criticals, that demonstrated that this process was acceptable. And the more time you spent online, the quicker the process, and the less communication errors. And What we did find though as well is that this process doesn't really lend itself to short notice or unannounced inspections. You really have to let a site know in a reasonable time to give them enough time to provide the information that you want. If you want to do an unannounced inspection, we identified that that would actually have to be done on site and turn up. Okay, next slide. What now and where next? Okay, next slide. So, I don't know exactly how many inspections we've done that are remote, because we've also moved from remote to hybrid inspections, and we've also done some on-site inspections. And in the UK, we've had 3 different lockdowns, but different parts of the country have had lockdowns at different times. So we've also got inspectors that aren't well enough to travel into certain areas, and we want to protect them and make sure that they're safe. So our best guess at the moment is that we've done somewhere between 800 and 1,000 remote or hybrid inspections since the 1st of April last year. That's not an insignificant amount. The breakdown would roughly be, we're probably over 400 for GDP, maybe 450, possibly more. GMP is around about the probably mid 300s, 400 mark, and the other XPs make up the rest. So a significant number of remote inspections. What I recommend to inspectors now is that you spend the whole time online, essentially. Just like this, speaking to the camera, you're seeing the people that you're speaking to. When we initially started the process, it was going to be online part of the time and touching base. But I found that if you go online the whole time, you can build up a rapport with the site. You can understand where the risk areas are much better. You can keep things moving along, so you're almost compelled to look at things in the same timeline that you would on an on-site inspection. The site can see exactly what you're doing, so they have no qualms about understanding or being able to prepare for what happens next. It minimizes the risk of data integrity issues, because if you ask for something, you'll see it in the timeline that you're looking for, and that means that it's less likely to be able to create it in the background and then delayed. And it also means that you can shorten, you probably don't need those daily roundups, or they don't need to be quite so long because you're having all that time during the day with the people. You might believe that that's incredibly tiring for people online, but every inspection is tiring. It's tiring for the inspector, it's tiring for the site. So if you're online the whole time, you do get the benefit because you can understand what the inspector is looking for, but you will also guarantee that the inspection will finish earlier because the timelines are bound and it will minimize the risk of any overlap. When it comes to pictures of the facility and videos, we've used those quite a bit. They're very useful. We know the limitations, but they're certainly something that we would like to continue using. And then we've been using Teams more frequently, that's our system, but you can have that request control button, and that's a really useful thing. So the site should enable that for the inspector. We have had a lot of occasions where we've gone to a site and that request control button is not enabled, and it takes IT a number of days for some reason to get that sorted. So if you can get that clicked in advance, that's good. That means that the site can share a document. The inspector can look through it without having to say up a page, down a page. We can go through the document much more quickly, go back to bits that we want, and you can see exactly what we're looking at because we do that on screen, and that's not too dissimilar from you sitting next to us in a room. So that's something that is incredibly useful. Then from inspections around the world, what we've also done is we have Carried out some inspections actually physically on site due to the COVID pandemic, supply of medicine, so people have been to certain places, but on the whole, our inspections, remote inspections, have been UK based with some overseas. The overseas ones, what we've trained people to do is skew their day so that their hours match much more closely the sites. That makes your day a lot easier. You don't have to then get lots of people working out of hours. It means that the inspection just doesn't cover half a day each day. And that means it's only one person, one or two people, the inspector or inspectors, that can then move their day a little bit. And that's a lot easier than the site moving theirs. That means, again, from a data integrity perspective, there's much less risk because information is being provided as it's requested. And for all the inspections that we've done overseas, and admittedly it's a limited number, but for all of them, all of the inspectors found them successful, and they found them very useful and enabled the issuance of a GMP certificate. Next slide. Okay, so where now and what next, part 2. So we've got a team looking at some quite smart technology, the best technology to do virtual tours, and we're making progress on that. But we're not at that stage yet, and obviously not all sites have that capability. So for the on-site inspections, obviously remote part of the inspection covering the site, it's obviously beneficial to be able to look around, see what's going on. So the site needs good connectivity. It needs to have worked out the best way to do that, to facilitate it for the inspector, how to get sound so the site can actually hear what the inspector's questions are. The people doing the walking around can answer those questions. It's quite common to have a camera, even just a mobile phone or a tablet on a gimbal, so that then stabilizes the walk around, so that the site transmission isn't jumpy, which then makes the inspector feel sick. We sometimes have had examples where the person in the main room is answering the questions, but someone is just wandering around with the camera and being directed to point up or down. Sometimes the person has a microphone or a two-way microphone so they can hear what's going on, and they can also ask the operators or the analysts how to explain what's going on. And that all is very useful, but it absolutely relies on internet connection, good internet connection. And what people, a lot of people don't realise as well, is that the inspectors don't always have good internet connections. So I have had to hire a hotel room today so that I can then do this, because my internet in my house isn't good enough for the upload speed. So hopefully this is working okay for you. So there can be difficulties at both sides, which then leads to problems. But the more work you've done, the better. So we are still doing hybrid inspections at the moment. We're being steered towards, if you've got, say, a 3-day inspection, you do 2 days of it remotely and then 1 day on site. But sometimes it's just easier to go to the site because you've still got the travelling on either side there. So it depends on the incidences of COVID in that particular area. But we're perfectly happy to do inspections that way. There are definite advantages with hybrid inspections and remote inspections. So we can bring along some other trainee inspectors or other inspectors who aren't trained in that particular area, and that might not be cost effective to do routinely for an inspection. They might not have time to accommodate for the travel. We can call on expert inspectors a lot more easily, bring them into that part. If there's a significant issue found, it's a lot smoother to stop for a period of time to make sure that everyone understands. Whereas when you're on site, the time pressures can be quite significant to keep going and find what you're looking for. So we can make sure that the site provides all the information that we need to determine the risks and then move on. But what about future inspections? Well, some we will definitely do remotely. So if we've got someone in the UK that imports medicines from overseas and they're a virtual importer, they don't have an office, sorry, they just have an office, we will do that remotely, because there's no point sending someone traveling to a room where there's nothing else to see. We can just look at the documents online. We will use the camera systems. I think I've mentioned before. It's also quite nice if you've got documents that have been filled in by hand. If you just have a camera that sits above the desk, you put your documents on the ground, on the table, and then after a second or two, these document reading cameras allow you to read documents. You can just ask for the page to be turned. You can read 2 pages at a time, and you can go through a batch record in about the same time that you might do it on site. So we'll continue to do that for hand-filled documents. We will consider where necessary or where appropriate to do remote inspections. Our consideration is that the on-site inspections are still the gold standard, still give you the most information, and are the best way to operate. We've worked with a number of regulators as well. So PICs are looking at coming up with a guideline on remote inspections. We've reviewed the PDA document on their remote inspections and have an acknowledgement in there from the MHRA for our support on that, and we will work with ICMRA and other agencies to try and make sure that the way we approach these inspections are appropriate and based on risk. And I think if you would like to click on the next page, I'd just like to say from that, yep, one more click, is that okay? Thank you for listening. So I really appreciate that, your time. I'll pass over to Ian now at this point. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Ewan. And if you can just confirm that everyone can hear me.
Yep.
Thanks. Yeah, so thanks. I hope Ewan's provided some very real and practical information there that'll help move us forward with our remote inspections. And just linking in with something that Ewan said. So I think I'm on a number of international calls with other regulators, US FDA being one of those that are present. And I think there is a common understanding of the term hybrid inspection. And I think, as Ewan's alluded to, that's something that will be taken forward and properly defined in various guidance and documents. So the hybrid approach, where we do a lot of work remotely but do the essential work on site, you know, that bit that doesn't facilitate the remote working, I think that is the way forward, and I think that's a common understanding across international regulators. But the hybrid inspection approach, if you use that term, I think everybody kind of understands that. So I've just got a couple of things I just wanted to link in with what Ewan's already talked about. I'm not going to go into any detail about remote inspections, but just to provide some linked and relevant information, provide information about some of the wider context, and also just hopefully some useful links for you to take forward and review at your leisure. The first point I just want to draw your attention to, so I know that Ewan's referred to the issuing of GMP certificates at the outcome of a successful remote inspection. We'd issue the GMP certificates, and just to draw your attention to the MHRA database, where we have updated our comment there to extend the validity period, obviously related to travel restrictions and COVID, etc. So we have extended the validity period of our inspections and our certificates to the end of 2022. And that aligns with the extension that has also been posted on the European inspection database hosted by the EMA. So that's UDRA GMDP. So I guess it also shows that we're still very much aligned and working with and collaborating with our European regulators. The next point I just wanted to refer you to was the MHRA Inspectorate blog. So we still continue to use that blog. and it's got some recent updates on it with regards protecting the supply chain and data integrity, and we do continue to use that platform to get messages across in a timely fashion. So so do consider logging into that and making sure you're on the email list for that, and I'm happy to provide links to the facilitators later that they can share with the audience on a wider level. Further to that, in the wider context of things, the MHRA and information related to the MHRA is can be found on the gov.uk web pages, and so hopefully you'll find some information there, useful information there. We do put news and updates on that, any guidance in particular related to COVID and COVID related flexibilities during the restricted travel, and that obviously applied to the Inspectorate and clearly to industry and the issues there in order to maintain supply. One thing I would draw your attention to there is our delivery plan. So we have a new delivery plan, and there are specific references in there to some of the items that Ewan's referred to in his presentation. So it does talk about remote inspections in the agency delivery plan. It does talk about the use of visual technology. And just to provide update in that respect, we have been working with the ICMA group and PICS to take matters forward a collaborative level internationally, and so do look out for a reflection paper which is being issued by ICMA, and that is on remote inspections, and I guess it not only refers to GMP, it also refers to GCP, so good clinical practice matters. So it's not just GMP inspections. I think Ewan also referred to GDP inspections. We have been using remote inspections across the board for all inspections that we perform at the MHRA. The delivery plan also talks about our collaborative partnerships. We've mentioned a couple there, so PICS and ICRA. So they get taken forward. There are some specific examples there which bring in some wider regulators from, for example, the US FDA is mentioned on a number of occasions, and other international partners, Health Canada, the Australian authorities. So do take a look at some examples of collaborative working there. And we will continue to push forward from a GMP perspective and be involved from a GMP perspective. Ewan made specific reference to PICS. So and what he neglected to mention was that he's part of the working group on remote inspections. So so not only is he the local expert within the MHRA, he'll be taking that forward with the PICS network and working that through collaboratively. And for my sins, I'm on the inspection reliance group. So I just wanted to draw your attention to that, because clearly in the world we're living in today, with all the travel restrictions, it's really important that we work together with other regulators. But if you looked at the GMP inspection reliance guidance, that's PI 048. There is a lot of onus on you as the manufacturers, as the inspected party, to share information about other inspections that you've been subjected to. So do make it known to us as an inspectorate, to the FDA teams when they approach you about doing inspections. Share information, share inspection reports, share those reports and those inspections with your sponsors, with your marketing authorization holders, with the UK parties that we kind of interact with as well, so that there's clear understanding and knowledge about the inspections, and we can then start to use those reliance initiatives more, and we're going to need to going forward, and certainly in the interim period. So I'll, as I said, I'll provide reference to that, and just by way of a reminder, the ICMA group, so ICMRA, that's the International coalition of medicines regulatory agencies. So we're a party to that. The US FDA are a party to that. The Indian authorities are a party to that. So they're also members of that group. And so lots of the work we're doing at an international level is being taken forward through the ICMA group. And hopefully that will provide alignment and consistent guidance moving forward. And we're looking forward to be party to that to take forward the MHRA approach. And hopefully, from what you've heard from you and ourselves, that we want to play a leading role in that going forward, and we're happy to take feedback. And as Ewan stated in his presentation, a lot of what we've learned is based on feedback both from the inspecting party and from the inspectors. So we need to take that forward to make sure that we can deliver and fulfil our roles and responsibilities as we move forward. So that's about all I had to say, really. But thanks, Ewan, and thanks for the invite to be party to this conference.
Thank you, Ewan and Ian. Very interesting and very nice presentation. Probably with a lot of animation, it was very interesting presentation. So thanks, Ewan. And Ian, thank you very much for giving the ideas about what collaborative efforts are being done between the other regulatory industries and the MHRA. I think it was very nicely talked about the challenges which are faced during the inspection, actions which are required to be done, what went well, what are the learning, and what next. I think every facet of the inspections, remote inspections, were covered by the Ian in his presentation. Thank you very much. I think there are few questions, not many, but there are few questions which let me ask you from the. One question has come from the audience related to the first inspection, first remote inspection, and the last remote inspection. What difference did you find? What improvements were found in the overall things?
Okay. Yeah. So the first one we did was the 1st of April. It wasn't me, so I don't know it that well, but I can tell you. Actually, I'll tell you three. I'll tell you the one I did myself, probably a year before COVID, one or so years before COVID. I'll tell you probably the first one that I did, and then how I got on with one of my most recent ones. So that's probably a decent example. So the first ever remote inspection that I did, or maybe I've done 2 or 3, but anyway, the certainly before COVID, I had an idea of some things I wanted the site to tell me. I got them to email me the information, and I started looking at it. I read everything. They didn't know what I was reading. They were sitting around waiting. I mailed them occasionally. They took a while to respond to my mails, probably because the people were in the background were doing other things, just like I ended up doing. I ended up answering questions to emails that were sent to me. I would get phone calls. I would get people seeing that I was still in the office. They would see my status, even though it would show that I was busy, people would still contact me. So what happened was the inspection should have lasted probably 2 days, and I think it lasted 3 weeks. Not 100% of that time over those 3 weeks, but the overall duration was 3 weeks. So it was also difficult to find the information through emails, because as you're going along, you're getting lots of different emails from different people contacting you. So that was before. The first one, the sites were happy to get the inspection. We had a phone call with them. The information was provided. The file transfer system worked fine, no worries at all. But I provided the information, did my opening, and then the site would take a while to respond. So you would then go offline. And in that time when you're offline, I would try to read other documents, but other people would contact me. Then you could see that the site weren't always fully understanding the questions that were being asked, but they were waiting until the next time that you had a call with them to clarify the points. They weren't sending emails or phoning or doing anything. So probably for a 2 or 3 day inspection, it was probably 5 to 6 days. The findings, I think, were still valid. I actually learned quite a bit about the site because I did end up reading a bit more of their SOPs because I had a bit more time because I was waiting for them to respond. So in some respects, I also used it as an education for myself. But you don't want to read everyone's SOPs all the time, fully on every inspection. So the inspection was a success, but it was not the quickest, and I definitely found deficiencies, and the site definitely appreciated having an inspection. But I don't think that they had any massive interaction with me, and I don't think that they found opportunities to ask quick questions to learn or build on their experience. Because an inspection is a little bit of a two-way process as well. It's not just the inspector being on site and reviewing things and finding deficiencies. There are points where you have discussions, there are informal times, lunchtime, that type of thing, where you just get a chance to discuss wider things. None of that was really available. But in my most recent inspections, including one that I did in a site in India, online the whole time, able to build up a rapport with people. You really got a feel for what the site was like. You could have some discussions that were maybe akin to what you would have on site whilst you were waiting for documents to arrive. The technology was good. The tours of the facility worked fine. You could hear, you could see. They had people able to take the camera, look behind equipment. They'd worked out the best way to be able for me to communicate well with the people on the tour. The timeline for the inspections was identical to that timeline that I would have been on site by myself and absolutely regardless of whether it was a remote inspection or not. I had a much more of a confidence because I was able to interact with people in a much closer way. The site were happier because they had had time to interact with me and ask me questions. And you can we're not there to be consultants, but we can provide some feedback on where we see issues or how we might like to see it better in certain areas. So the site felt that it had been beneficial to them, hadn't encumbered them overly, and I'm sure that the experience that they had from us also helped them with any audits that they'd have from other inspectors or other customers. So across the board, it was a definite improvement over time. And if you look back at what I did a while ago to what I did now, it's night and day. That they're hardly comparable.
Thank you, Ewan. Very nicely explained. And I think both of the teams, industry as well as the regulators, have learned how to work in this remote working. So probably that has helped to understand the process better and work out better. So time is reduced considerably, understanding is better. I just wanted to ask you, people are asking is one more question is related to what industry should do to make it easier for the regulator. Are there any tips from your side which industry should follow so that will improve the inspection process further and better?
Do you want me to go for that, Ian? Yeah, so those pre-inspection requests, the sooner you get them to the site, from the site to the inspector, the better. Read them properly because they will tell you which columns to put in for deviations, change controls, etc. If you now look at the videos that were recommended or highlighted on that second slide with the QR codes, you'll see what we look at. So and all inspectors do the same thing. So if you can look at those videos, understand what we're looking at, that helps you to present the information in a way that is useful for us. Please, if you're using spreadsheets, don't put in merged cells because then you can't filter and you can't then look for information down a list if you've merged some cells together. So please don't do that. The inspectors then have to spend some time sorting that out ourselves. If you are unsure what the question is or what is being expected, please ask. And I think Rachel mentioned that earlier. We find people so keen to respond that they'll give us what they think is the question, response to the question. But please have a little bit of time to consider what the question is and make sure you understand it fully and then give the information. That works best for everyone. If you can do that walk around and do a mock, if you've got a couple of sites, you could maybe get someone from another site to do to dial in and make sure that your internet is good enough in the various places that we might go to on an inspection. So you have to consider all the places we might go and make sure that you can get there. We like to look into your systems. So if you have electronic systems, whether it be LIMS or other things, we like to be able to see into those. So if you can facilitate systems that allow that, and don't make, we're not asking for control of the mouse in these systems, where we would be asking someone to click on our behalf and we would be asking for it. And they would negotiate it. So we're not going to press anything that would cause any problems. Make sure that you have the information, holistic information. So if you have multiple systems, please make sure that you explain that to the inspector. So if you've got 2 or 3 different deviation systems that you use in certain circumstances, it's a little bit harder when you're not on site to work out the type of systems that you've got. And so if you only provide spreadsheets covering certain points of those, and we find out later on that you have other deviations, yeah, but we use deviations for this type of thing, we put them in there, or non-conformances, and we didn't give you that list. That makes it difficult for us, and it will almost certainly extend the timelines. And then one big thing for us, and this is just a general point, is the responses to your inspection we would treat as a regulatory commitment. So if you say you're going to fix a certain thing by a certain date, then if you are not going to be able to do it, which is perfectly understandable, you need to let us know. Please don't wait until we arrive on site to find that you haven't done the thing that you said you were going to do before, because that evaporates some of the trust that we need to have. So any inspection, make sure that you communicate open and clearly with us. And if you communicate open and clearly with us, we can then have a relationship during the inspection. That means that we can be open and communicate clearly with you and understand the potential risks. And if you do that, that would be great. Ian, you got anything to add to that?
One thing I was just going to add is in the pre-inspection phase, just make sure, as you well know, when we travelled far and wide, if we, for example, if we came to a manufacturing site in India, whilst we were on site, we would also look at other areas that were about to be utilised. So let's say currently it was a tablet manufacturing facility, but you wanted to, in the future, you wanted to add capsule manufacturing. We would make sure that if time permitted, we'd cover that as part of the inspection. So use the same principles for remote inspections, that you identify and work with the inspector to be clear on what the scope of the inspection is, and put the onus back on the inspector to make this decision. If we can't accommodate any additional needs, we'll let you know, but be clear in that communication up front. So that requires a lot of engagement with marketing authorization holders about future plans and that. So that's as important for remote inspections as it is for on-site inspections. So I think, and also, as I can't reiterate enough, if there have been other regulatory authorities who've done on-site inspections or done remote inspections, share that information with us so that we can use that as part of it, and it will inform our inspection and allow us to prioritize what we need to look at.
Ian and Ewan. I think there is one more question related to the does the dosage differences like the solid oral versus injectables versus MDIs, does it pose any different problems in the remote inspections, or it's the same for the all kind of dosage forms?
Yeah, it does make a difference. It's to do with risk, and it will depend on what the application is for, or what the requirement is for, what the history of the site is. If the site has, I think Rachel mentioned this as well in her site inspection, if the site's had data integrity issues before, then it's quite hard to cover that easily with a remote inspection and make sure that everything is okay. But yes, it definitely does make a difference, because you need to see the operations very clearly for a sterols inspection and biologics and work out exactly what's going on. It's not impossible, but it does definitely make a difference and impacts our risk assessment of our approach to the inspection.
Thank you. I think last question. We have talked about the disadvantages of the remote inspections. There are some definite advantages related to the remote inspection. Really, you are avoiding the cost of the travel, time of the traveling, all those things are saved into this. So considering this, do you expect that some part it will continue to have remote inspection instead of the physical inspections? Do you expect this to happen in the near future?
Do you want to take that, Ian, or?
I think Ewan referenced in his presentation that there are some operators in the UK for the operations they perform. They either need a manufacturing authorization or a wholesale dealer authorization, but actually their presence in the UK is merely an office, and they don't handle product, so there's no storage of product, there's no manufacturing. That Ewan used the term virtual operator, virtual manufacturer. So those operations, they suit themselves perfectly well to remote inspections, and like you've alluded to, that there's obviously savings there on both ends. So from the Inspectorate perspective, there's savings in terms of travel time, expense of accommodation, etc. And from the recipient, from the inspected party, it also allows probably better use of time as well. So, but those areas we plan to continue to do those virtually, remotely, I should say, and there's no reason why. I guess then we'd just be looking at kind of for cause on-site inspections if there was something that we needed to follow up on site. But I think the general approach in that respect will be to continue doing remote inspections. And we've also mentioned, and I mentioned just briefly there, that the approach with regards hybrid inspections, I think that will continue, where we can do more preparation and more assessment work as part of the inspection, where we can do that remotely and then utilize our time when on site. But clearly, if we're going to be on site and it takes time to get there, we're probably not going to spend an hour there. We're going to probably spend the whole day on site. I think that's safe to say. But we'll do as much as we can by distant assessment, by remote working as well. Please add to that if you want, Ewan.
I'm not sure I can. You did a great job there. Yeah, there are some.
For patiently answering all our questions, and I think thank you very much for the nice session. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Pleasure.